This meeting is being recorded.
Ready?
Stephanie, you want to?
Yep. Martha Whitmore,
Present.
Kathy Chandler Henry,
Present.
Mark Rober, Steve Beckley,
Present.
Mike Richard, Kathleen Curry,
Mike is here.
Mike is
Present.
here. I saw him.
Sorry.
here. Stan Winery,
Here.
Scott McGinnis,
Here.
Tom Gray,
Yep.
Mark Catlin, John Ely,
Here.
Alden Vandenbrink,
He's
He's
here.
Yeah, he texted in the chat box. He's on his phone, but oh, there he is. We can't hear him, but we can see him. How about that?
Doug Munger's here.
Doug Munger, Rebe Hazard,
Here.
Taylor Haas.
Here.
We do have a quorum, Madam President.
Yeah, I've got a quorum. And so everybody, first of all, I just want to thank staff as well as all of the directors for being flexible on this meeting. Just even with the technical difficulties today, just small little blips, that makes a 2-day meeting, just kind of trying. So we're hoping that the staff is feeling better and that hopefully by February 8th and 9th, everybody's healthy and hopefully we can have the rest of our meeting. So today what we are doing is our official meeting as required by statute on the 3rd Tuesday of January. We will take care of some business that really needs to get done today. And then the bulk of the agenda, we will hold over for the special meeting on February 8th and 9th. There are so many important issues in that agenda. My feeling was just that we really needed to be able to devote the time and attention and be able to really have good conversations about many of those issues. So thank you everyone for being so cooperative and flexible. And so with that, we'll have the presentation and report of directors' credentials for Delta, Eagle, Grand, Hinsdale, and Summit counties.
Madam President and Board, we do find, both myself and General Counsel find the credentials to be in appropriate format and have been received in a timely manner from all counties involved, and would ask that the Board accept those credentials.
And so we are accepting credentials for Mark Rober to be the new director from Delta County, for Kathy Chandler Henry as the director from Eagle County, Mike Richard from Grand,
Taylor Hawes from Summit.
Taylor Haas from Summit, Stan Winery from Hinsdale. So if I could have a motion to approve the credentials, please.
So moved.
Motion by Ely, second by Kathleen Curry. Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. Wonderful. Everybody is returning other than Mark Rober, but I don't see him on here this morning. So we will welcome him. When we see him. Next item of business is election for board officers for 2022. You have written ballots in your packet, but clearly written ballots are troublesome when we're meeting virtually. So I would open the floor for nominations for president. Kathy Chandler Henry.
Hi, I would move to nominate Martha Whitmore as president of the Colorado River Water Conservation District and to thank her for her leadership last year.
Thank you.
Second. Second.
I'm not sure who had the second, but it was seconded. Thank you, Taylor. Appreciate it. Any discussion?
There is a poll. If you click on participants, you can click on yes or no.
Great.
That might be an easy way to do it.
Perfect.
So Madam Chair, I think it would probably be appropriate. I would substitute motion to move that Director Whitmore be the chairman and we cast a unanimous ballot for her.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate it. I appreciate the vote of confidence. And now a motion for vice president.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
this is Kathleen. I'd like to nominate Kathy Chandler Henry for vice president.
Okay. Nomination by Curry, second by Winery.
Yes.
Second by Winery. Any discussion? All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Thank you.
Welcome
all.
back.
I appreciate it.
Okay, we have a resolution for our outgoing director, Tom Alvey. Has everyone had a chance to look at that? I'd entertain a motion to approve the resolution.
So moved. This is Gray.
Motion by Gray, second.
Second, Beckley.
Second by Beckley. Thank you very much. We're going to miss Tom. We'll see him again, hopefully in July at the July meeting when we always do kind of our picnic and awards and that kind of thing. So all in favor of the resolution, aye.
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 Any opposition, nay. Okay, that motion passes. All right, we've got our consent agenda next. These are fairly routine matters. Designation of where we're posting our notices is required by Colorado Open Records and Open Meetings law. Reappointment of the general manager, the general counsel and treasurer, confirmation of the assistant secretary, approval of minutes from the September and October and the special meeting in December, and acceptance of the treasurer's reports and draft financials. Fairly routine business. Is there any item on the consent agenda that any director would like to remove from the consent agenda? All right. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Who was that? John Ely? No, John Ely seconded. Who was Stan Winery? Motion by Stan Winery, second by John Ely. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. That motion carries. That takes us down to the general manager's report. Andy?
Yes, we'll be very brief on this. I again appreciate everybody's willingness to move the agenda around and shorten it today. We do have two appointments to roundtables that we're asking for board action on. One, Yampa White Green, is Hunter Causey, who has served on that board, is tied up these days rather tremendously with work at the Richard Dam and Wolfwood Mountain Reservoir. And so we have a Mike Eitel from our staff, our senior water resources specialist is asking or has agreed to serve on that board for us. We'd like the board to confirm that appointment. And then the second, which can be done at the same time, is with John Courier retiring, we'd like to replace John on the Southwest Basin Roundtable with the appointment of David Kanzer. We think both are appropriate, and if the board would be willing, we'd appreciate a vote confirming their appointments.
Okay, motion?
I'll move to appoint Mike Hytel and Dave Kanzer to the Southwest and the Yampa White Green Roundtables.
Okay, motion by Tom Gray, second by Taylor Haas. Any discussion? All those in favor, aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay.
Hey, thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Zane Kessler. If Zane has joined us, I know he was at the State Affairs Committee. There he is. All right, he is here. Perfect.
Andy, do we need to take care of B and C first, or are you standard insurance requirements and?
No, on today's agenda, we just had A.
Okay.
So there's
Okay,
no.
that's just the
Yep.
same report. That's fine.
Right. We will cover those other things at our meeting in February. And I will just, let me briefly just say, we're looking at venues in February, ideally something that we can spread out the board a little bit. And so we may end up down in Mesa County at CMU. We're working with them. Unfortunately, the room that we used in October is not available on February 8th and 9th, but we're working on that, and we'll let the board know as soon as we're able to locate that and make sure everybody has a heads up on that. I do know changing that has unfortunately made it impossible for some directors. I think Director Beckley in particular is unable to attend the February meeting, and do apologize for that, Steve, and certainly would prefer to have it at a date that was available for all. So.
Okay.
Okay. So moving on, Zane, if I can turn it over to you for State Affairs.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Thank you, Madam President. The legislative session is off to a start, and I will give it about 120 days before I give you my opinion on how it's gone. Thus far, we've only seen a small handful of bills in the water arena introduced. There are a handful of draft bills circulating that have been the subject of conversations at the Water Congress State Affairs Committee and elsewhere. We will bring those to you when they become a little bit more clear as to what their trajectory looks like. Today, I've got 4 bills for your consideration, and if you don't mind, Madam President, I'll just jump right in.
Yes, please do.
Okay, the first bill is House Bill 1011. It's a wildfire mitigation incentives for local governments. Establishes a grant program to match local funds that are raised from a dedicated revenue source that's specifically intended to be used for forest management or wildfire mitigation efforts. This was unanimously approved by the Interim Wildfire Matters Review Committee. My recommended position for the board on this bill is to support the bill.
Okay, do you want us to do these one at a time?
I think so, only because I'd like to actually move the investment water speculation bill that I sent around last night to the end so we can have a conversation with council on that.
Okay, is there a motion? Yes, Director Haas.
Thank you, Madam President. I just have a quick question. How does this bill interact with the infrastructure bill? I know there's money in there for wildfire mitigation, and I'm just wondering, can that money be used for this purpose to match or not?
As written, it's my understanding that no, that wouldn't be, the money established by this grant program wouldn't be eligible unless the local government does specifically have a dedicated revenue source in place. And so I see it very much as a bit of a Tabor carrot, or a carrot incentivizing local governments to go out and establish those funding mechanisms.
Any other questions? Is there a motion? Yes. No?
So I have a question. This is Gray.
Sure.
Um,
Oh, great.
I understand there's a nexus between mitigation of fuels and wildfire mitigation. There's a nexus with water, but there's many other issues connected to mitigation outside of the water world, and I don't see a focus on water in here. So I'm just wondering whether we should take a position on this bill.
Okay. Anyone want to comment on that, or Zane, do you have a thought on that?
There were 4 bills reported out of the interim wildfire matters committee. This bill, which at the request of the board, staff monitors the activities of that interim committee. This was the only one that I saw a nexus to the communities within the river district and a tie to water resources, and specifically just the health and benefit of our communities. So, but I do not see this as a must support bill. It was one that I thought our board and our constituents would be paying attention to.
Okay. Does anyone want to make a motion on this?
So this is Munger. I guess the other thing that I'm concerned here, and again, we know what the fires have done in all of our counties and the rest recently. So I'm really concerned we still don't have the partners of the federal government here. And so we're going to go out and take care of the U.S. Forest Service properties as well. So, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to do some of that we don't have those hard lines between where mitigation should be done, especially in community protection and water protection as well. So, I'm supportive of the concept that, we just need to figure out how we can get all the players on the table here. So and again, I don't know if support is a good thing. I'm like Director Gray. I'm not exactly sure. So again, we tie it back to some water needs and the rest for us and the rest. So, I would vote for support. I'm not gonna. I don't hear from anybody else.
Director Curry, you looked like you were about to speak.
Thank you. I was just looking for the little hand raise thing. So I haven't talked to the Gunnison County Commissioners yet about this one. And I think support would make sense, but I don't think we have a dedicated revenue stream to make the whole concept work. So maybe I'm misunderstanding the bill a bit, but as long as I can kind of take the position that this doesn't preclude other approaches. If they were to support this bill, this is just a tool in the toolbox, I think, for them. And we have so many areas of dead timber in the county that I would think that the commissioners that I represent would want to support the bill.
Okay. Anyone else have comments, or Director Hawes?
I'm just wondering, again, I haven't talked to our county commissioners either about this, but again, wildfire is top of mind every season now. So it is an important issue, and I think they would support it. I don't actually know if they had a dedicated source at this time. And I just wonder, Zane, if it's possible to amend this to kind of get at this question of how do we both bring those federal partners to the table, tap into infrastructure money or ARPA money for this. Probably ARPA money is not a good fit at this point, but infrastructure bill money is. And I just wonder how to make it more useful, how to make sure that we're not cutting certain counties out because they don't have the dedicated source, and incentivizing these good management plans.
Yeah, this is Kathy. Just sort of tying into what Doug said and Taylor, Eagle County has created a wildland fire task force and we put money into it. The towns are putting money into it. But there is some concern that we continue to fund the U.S. Forest Service for rangers and for fire mitigation. And there's money in Eagle County to do that. There may not be money in counties that have even more federal lands and less tax base to be able to do that. So maybe monitor is what we want to do until some of those questions are asked. I mean, there's not much to disagree with the wildland fire bill. That's certainly something that is good, but maybe we want to monitor until we figure out this funding piece a little bit.
I'm thinking that may be sounding like maybe we bring this back at the meeting February 8th and 9th for further discussion and action. I'm not seeing anyone anxious to move a position.
God dang. I got a ship pile of stuff. Are yours in?
There we go. And I think our new director from Delta County, Mark Rober, is on with us now. Mark, are you there? Yes, there you are.
I am.
Welcome to the River District Board, Director Rober. We're pleased to have you. We approved your credentials, and so you're full-fledged voting member.
Okay, well, thank you. Apologize for being late. I'm on the road and had a little trouble getting internet access, so that's the reason I was late.
We understand, but thank you so much for being here and for filling very large shoes left by Tom Alvey.
That is true, and hopefully I can rise to the challenge.
I'm certain of it. All right, Zane, I'll turn it back over to you for the next bill.
That sounds good. Thank you, Madam President. The next bill is Senate Bill 028, the Groundwater Compact Compliance Fund. This was the subject of a lot of discussion at the interim committee this year. It advanced out of the interim water committee with unanimous support from the 10 members and enjoys a budget request from Governor Polis in the amount of $15 million to pay for the purchase and retirement of wells and irrigated agriculture in the Republican and Rio Grande River basins. I think it is important to note that any expenditures of these funds, again, subject to appropriations, would be based on recommendations from the board of directors of either the Rio Grande Water Conservancy District or the Republican River Water Conservation District. I'll add a bit of color commentary. I think it is clear that these two basins are in need of some solutions. Andy and I have had conversations with Senator Cleve Simpson. This is really the brainchild of Senator Simpson, who has recognized the need to retire some ground in his basin in the Rio Grande, as well as in the Republican, in order to meet interstate compact delivery obligations, as well as groundwater sustainability rules in those basins. My recommended position on this bill is to support.
Are there any questions for Zane on this bill? Anyone want to move staff recommendation?
So this is Director Monger. So I have a quick question for Zane. So and this is interesting. It's kind of like our discussion of demand management. And so are they going to do a lottery to figure out who gets to be eligible? Or are they going to pick, or do we have a plan, or we're just dedicating the money for right now and we'll figure out the plan later of how we're going to pick who does and doesn't and who gets to win and who doesn't win or whatever, whether winning is what, but who gets go from there. So if you could help me there.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, Director Monger. It's my understanding that they do have processes in place in the Rio Grande Basin. They have been using public dollars for the permanent retirement of lands there on a voluntary basis for some time now. Andy, I'll maybe dish it to you to see if you have any additional details on specifically how they go about this. But it's my understanding that they are targeting marginal lands. It is voluntary, and this is a practice that they've deployed already in the past.
And I think that's true in the Rio Grande Basin, Zane, and they actually are through a fee-based system, have generated quite a bit of money in the Rio Grande themselves to purchase, and it's permanent retirement of these properties. And they based on productivity and a number of other criteria, location above the aquifer, those kind of things, they've identified properties that are targeted for retirement, and they're entering into voluntary transactions with the landowners. In the Republican, they too have identified the properties. They have not been as successful in raising the funds, but they have been working on this for some time. They all recognize, unfortunately, that they've set up a situation where the groundwater is not sustainable, and is not being replenished at the same rate that they're pumping it out, and that's why they're looking at these alternatives. It is, I would say, Commissioner Munger, similar to demand management, but not identical in that it's permanent and that it is groundwater, not surface water, in these two basins. When you see what I will say, one thing I like about this legislation is that it is, while the funds are being managed or designated to be managed by the CWCB, the funds cannot be expended without the direction and concurrence and selection of the property by the conservation districts there. Both the Republican and the Rio Grande water conservation districts have to agree. And so there's a strong element of regional or local control, and self-determination that's going on there. Their directors are, I don't think anybody's ever excited about taking ag land out of production, but they're doing it the best they can in order to sustain the agricultural community that they hope will survive. So I hope that's helpful.
I would just,
Thank you.
Madam President, just to underscore what Andy said and to clarify something I failed to say earlier, is that this bill is being run at the request of the conservation districts in these two basins.
Any other questions?
Madam President, it appears Kathleen Curry has her hand up. Director Curry.
Thank you very much. Director Curry.
Thank you. Just a additional bit of information. This is a fraction of what the total amount of money that they had hoped to eventually put into this fund, because the bill just establishes the fund as I understand it. And then, as Zane pointed out, the dollars being contemplated are, I think, the 15 million, but both districts had identified a figure closer to 100 million during testimony this summer. So their dark days won't be over, even if this does get moved forward. And I sure hope that that maybe there'll be additional funds out there, because the alternative was across the board curtailment for all the wells, since they're out of compliance in both areas. So thanks, Zane, for bringing this one forward.
Any other questions, or does anyone want to move staff recommendation or make any other motion?
I'll move staff recommendation to support.
All right. Motion by Curry.
Second.
Second by Director Chandler Henry. Any further discussion? All those in favor, aye.
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 Opposed, nay.
Thank you, Madam President. The third bill for your consideration today is Senate Bill 30, which would expand the Water Resources Review Committee to include agriculture. Pretty simple, nothing burger bill by I think, at least the opinion of most. I was somewhat candid in my comments to the board on this. and we can dive into that, but the summary of the bill is simply that it changes the name of the Water Resources Review Committee and the scope of the Water Resources Review Committee's work to include agriculture. I think that is laudable. I think it's important. I will note as someone who attends every interim Water Resources Review Committee meeting, we already spend a significant amount of time on the important issues facing our agricultural water users in the state. I have some concerns though, and that's why my recommended position is to monitor this for the time being. While the bill does expand the scope of the policy issues the committee is directed to consider, it makes no changes to the resources that the committee has at its disposal, the number of meetings the committee will hold. And that leads me to, I think, some professional concern that it's likely to reduce the amount of time and resources that the committee pays to the important and growing challenges facing our state in the water arena. I think there are a couple of potential approaches here. One that was discussed this morning on the Colorado Water Congress State Affairs Committee call was to clarify or amend this bill to ensure that it focuses on the nexus between agriculture and water, so that we don't use important time and resources focusing on many of the other challenges facing agriculture. Another would be to just provide a piece of legislation that creates an agricultural review committee of some kind, or an interim committee on agriculture in addition to the Water Resources Review Committee. So I will leave it to the board to direct me on how to approach this, but my I guess just to put a point on my concerns, we've seen, especially in the last year, how little attention is paid to again the important and growing challenges facing us in the water community. I worry that by expanding the scope of the committee to include agricultural issues writ large, we run the risk of paying even less attention to our issues at the state capitol.
Good points, Zane. Comments, anyone? Anyone want to provide direction on what to do with this bill?
And again, staff recommendation is only to monitor at this point. I wanted to make sure it was on your radar.
Marty,
Yes.
this is Hazard.
Oh, thanks, Reby. I didn't see you. Go ahead.
You're fine. I was just gonna say, I'll make a motion to also monitor, and we do need to stay on top of it because ag's in a really hard place. So I appreciate it, Zane.
Okay, motion by Hazard. Is there a second?
Second.
Yes, second by Winery. Okay, it's been moved and seconded, staff recommendation to monitor, and we will discuss it again then I'm sure at the February meeting. All those in favor, aye.
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 Any opposed, nay.
Thank you, Madam President. The last bill for your consideration is the interim bill that has caused us all a bit of heartburn. It is Senate Bill, the official title of the bill now is Senate Bill 29, Investment Water Speculation. It is a poorly written bill. The bill's sponsors maintain that the draft that came out of interim committee was only intended to serve as a placeholder for a more robust conversation during the session about how to, or if we should approach the threat of investment water speculation via the legislature. Staff has been engaged in a few very preliminary conversations with some stakeholders about the potential for a CERPLO that might serve as an antacid of sorts for the heartburn that the bill in its current form has caused us. I think I'd like to rely on Andy and Peter here, but the concept that's being discussed is a strike below amendment that would specifically state that if someone buys water and is getting paid not to use it, then it would be presumed to be abandoned on a quicker time track than the normal 10 years, unless the water user is participating in one of the state conservancy or conservation district sanctioned water conservation programs, which are specifically spelled out in statute. Presumably a future demand management program could also fit in there if and when a demand management program is created. And I think really the strong point that I'd like to make is that a water right owner using a water right only to make money from non-use is not really using that water as a beneficial use. And maybe I'm wrong, but I have to believe that has long been understood in Colorado. And so a strike below amendment clarifying that concept that really takes on the speculative opportunities to make money off of non-use is an important approach here. I also think that this type of approach would importantly address some of the concerns that exist with regards to lower basin states paying agricultural users or investment firms in this case for non-use in the state of Colorado. With that, maybe I'll turn it to Peter and Andy. I do have some draft language that I'd be happy to bring up on the screen if Peter and Andy appropriate.
You know, thanks, Zane. The only thing I would want to add to that, Zane, I think you did a great job. The concerns about the current language in the bill and some of its companion bills at interim water resources that we've heard very loudly and clearly from constituents on the West Slope and frankly agricultural water users throughout the basin is that it encouraged or actually authorized and required the state engineer to peek inside of a real estate and water transaction and determine the intent of the buyer and seller, or at least the buyer, and really set up a fairly intrusive process. And so there were lots of objections about interference with private property rights. And so I think this proposed strike below amendment that Zane just detailed really avoids that peering into the transaction and looks more at someone's actual beneficial or lack of beneficial use of their water. It would still be deemed to be a beneficial use if you're using your water as part of or not using your water as part of a conservation program. We have examples of that our district has approved and continues to approve through authorized statutes. Clearly, if demand management were ever to come to fruition, it too would be a state approved or conservation or conservancy district approved program. So you would fit into that same element. This is not an anti-demand management statute, nor is it a pro-demand management. It just would enable that if the state decides to go that way. So it's a way to address the non-use of water outside of state-approved programs. And frankly, while we haven't seen any examples, and I want to be clear about this, we are not aware of any examples of lower basin water users paying upper basin water users to stop using their water. It is certainly a concept that has been discussed more and more as we see the shortage declaration taking place and the hit that Arizona is taking this year in terms of about a 500,000 acre foot diminishment of their Colorado River supply. So the possibility is there that transaction would occur. Certainly, certain investment companies are looking for ways to monetize the non-use of their water. They've clearly expressed great frustration with our state's unwillingness to jump and immediately implement a demand management program. So it is very logical to think that they will be looking for other ways to monetize the non-use of their water. This statute may be a fairly timely way just to clarify what I think Zane correctly said is really most people's understanding of anti-speculation law in our state. And it would enable the state to abandon water if it's not being used for its beneficial purpose. It would not interfere again with those private transactions that the current bill language seems to indicate. But Peter, I don't know if you have additional thoughts or comments on this.
I'm struggling to share my screen. Peter and I were just chatting behind the scenes about bringing up the language. If Audrey would grant me permission to screen share, I could put up this draft language for the board to see while Peter chimes in.
Well, I don't have a whole lot more to add. I think Zane and Andy did a good job of describing the concept here. I guess I would just, a couple of points I would add. And one is, you know, while Andy's correct that we haven't seen any sort of direct efforts by lower basin entities to pay to reduce consumption within Colorado that are, I guess, unilateral, you know, on their own accord. The lower basin entities were the primary financial contributors to the system conservation pilot project that occurred several years ago. That project, as part of that project, the River District enrolled the water rights at issue in its conservation program to provide them with the protections that the conservation program affords for non-use. In other words, they're not going to get zeros when they go to change their water right because they didn't use that water for that irrigation season. That non-use won't count towards abandonment. That's the protection that enrollment in a conservation program provides. Now, when that happened, I insisted that we weren't going to sign anything if the money was coming from the lower basin. And so while the lower basin may have ended up funding some of the conservation pilot projects in the other upper basin states, the money that was used within Colorado came only from Denver Water and the United States, and maybe some private funding as well, but didn't come from the lower basin entities because we didn't want to set that precedent. So that's one point. I guess the other is that just to sort of reiterate what Andy said, and I was on the anti-speculation task force, as the board knows, and the point that Andy was making was that a lot of the so-called concepts that were floated in that process peered directly into the private to private transaction, and people understandably found that objectionable. This concept would not do that, and it would simply look at what we, as Zane pointed out, historically have looked at as what you do with a water right. How you get a water right is you put it to beneficial use. And the statute as it exists today already provides that if you don't use water for a period of 10 years, it is presumed to be abandoned unless it is enrolled in one of the types of programs that Andy mentioned, such as a water conservation program like the River Districts or in-stream flow lease to the CWCB, those sorts of things. They don't, they get the exemption from the presumption of abandonment if they don't, if they're not using the water right. This bill would basically say, unless you're enrolled in one of those programs and you're getting financial consideration to not use the water, then it would accelerate the period of time in which the statutory presumption of abandonment applies. So it looks not into the private transaction, the private transaction. It looks into what is actually happening with the use or non-use of the water. So hopefully that is between the three of us a full background on the concept, and I'm sure any one of us would be happy to entertain any questions or concerns.
Okay. I'm sure that everybody's got a lot of questions or comments about this. Director McInnes, I know you wanted to comment. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Well, my angle on this is a little different. First of all, this is being put in place as a placeholder. And a placeholder is okay unless it's a piece of legislation. And a lot of dangerous things can happen with a bill that's allowed to go onto the floor, allowed to start the process as a placeholder. It has to be carefully managed. Otherwise, people who may not share our views can capture that because there's a bill status, strip it below the clause and go from there. And I think this bill, and I know both of these individuals, so I'm not impugning their integrity, but I am saying the facts are the facts. Both of them are seeking higher office. And you see this kind of thing. I mean, it's common human nature to sometimes let the politics interfere. And of course, this is the political arena, so it interferes all the time. This is a very dangerous bill to have out there by two people seeking higher office as a placeholder. And I think what we have to do is be very careful about negotiating with these two sponsors, the two prime sponsors, because the negotiation actually kind of gives some face of legitimacy to the status of the bill. And the bill is covering an area that is obvious to all of us, is so controversial and so many different sides. It is so premature that to give legitimacy at this point, then you got to kind of get lulled into a negotiation, and pretty soon some of the things we feel strong about and we put it on the field, they all of a sudden come back and want us to back off those positions and meet them halfway, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And lots of games can be played. So my point here is purely from the political aspect, and that is it's too premature. This bill came out of an interim committee. It had very, very little public attendance, had very, very little public input. It had very, very little legislative input because it was decided. And Peter, maybe you can tell us, or our external affairs can tell us how many representatives were on this actual committee, but the interim committee, I believe that's where this came from. So I'm just urging my colleagues on the River District Board to, from a political viewpoint, to be very cautious about in any way providing legitimacy at this point. Obviously, we want to address it in the future. But at this point, to what these two representatives are putting forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Director McInnes. Director McInnes, do you have a position on whether we should monitor or oppose or work to amend, or what direction would you advise for staff?
Well, good question. Obviously, in my opinion, we should monitor it. I'm not saying just walk away from it because it's out there now. It's introduced as a bill, but I think we should. In fact, I think we should monitor it very, very carefully. But for us to start negotiating, I'd be very, very. I'm overusing my words. I'd be cautious about entering into any negotiations and more attentive to lobbying, or to the extent that we can lobby, whatever our rules are as a district, other legislators, and say, look, this is too premature. So if it was me individually, I would be over there talking to legislators, say, back this off. It's time's not right. It's going to come, but there's so much groundwork that has to be done. Don't jump onto this and push this through for the sake of pushing it through. And time again, I have seen legislation just like this, not the same subject matter. It's put in a placeholder. It's an election year. You've got prime sponsors that are seeking higher office. Now, one of them apparently is back, the senator has backed off, but she's still looking for another office to run for. Don Quorum announced, the representative announced he is running for the US Congress. What happens in an election year on these placeholders, all of a sudden they can get jammed through at the very last minute if in fact the prime sponsors have enough political power and it assists their efforts to do it. So yes, we should monitor it very carefully, but I would put our resources into talking other people that are not on that bill saying, please don't sign on it, or please talk to us about it. There's lots of different opinions from lots of different directions, et cetera. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Director McGinnis. Who else would like to comment on this or ask questions? Yes, Andy.
Marty, if I may, I think Director McGinnis really raises some very good points, and I appreciate his insight into the legislative process and perhaps the motivation for some of the sponsorship. I would just say, I want to remind the board that we have a long history of the River District of engaging on legislation, and by doing that, bringing and a long history of negotiation on legislation that actually achieves our goals, and that history of engagement and that history of bringing ideas to the table is really important, and particularly this statute as written. I think you are hearing unanimously from staff that that the statute as written should be dead on arrival. It should be opposed. It should not move forward. But the concepts behind it are something that this board has expressed great concern about, and that is the speculation by investment companies in Western Slope water and their ultimate goal in terms of its non-use. The engagement on this statute, in my mind, is very important for our district to be able to maintain its position at the legislature as being very influential, and that history of engagement has allowed us to have an outsized influence on water legislation, despite our fraction of the population that we represent in the state. And so I appreciate Director McGinnis's direction, and we will take direction from the board absolutely on this. But I want to remind the board as to how we have historically functioned and the influence it's given the district on these legislative affairs. As you contemplate giving us direction, I would just ask that you think about that. Thank you.
Who else would like to comment or ask questions, or if there's a motion? Unusual for this board to have dead silence. Zane, I think you've heard concerns. I'm taking the fact that nobody else is speaking up as perhaps an indication that everybody's got some concerns about this. Director Hazard, were you wanting to speak?
I was just going to say we need to be sure that whatever we do, that any damages to other property, neighboring properties are also considered, and it needs to be very carefully written if we go forward with anything, because I don't know how you cannot damage your neighbors, especially in a 10-year span, but year to year it's hard. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Chandler Henry.
Yes, Zane, your recommendation is to amend, I believe, and does that imply a more active engagement than a monitor position? What does that mean exactly, an amend position?
Does the staff recommendation and the guidance I'm seeking from the board is to go out and try to make this bill better. How do we improve it and address the underlying concerns about investment speculation in West Slope water resources, recognizing that the bill as drafted is problematic on a number of fronts. My political calculus and responding to Director McGinnis a bit here, is that if it is not amended, the bill will die of its own weight. I think there is near unanimous opposition to this bill in the water community. I do see an opportunity, a political and a policy opportunity to do something meaningful here. We just would need a full strike balloon. We'd have to gut the bill and approach it, take the approach that Andy and Peter and I.
Well, with that, I move staff recommendation.
Okay. Director Chandler Henry moves staff recommendation. Is there a second?
Second, Beckley.
Second by Director Beckley. Further discussion? Yes, Director Curry.
Thank you. I guess I've dropped the ball by not having talked to my commissioners yet. We have an appointment later today, which isn't very handy. So I don't know if they would want the more aggressive, engagement role that Kathy Chandler Henry identified with her question, which was a great question, as opposed to monitor. So Madam Chair, I'm going to probably vote for the motion, but I'm assuming we will have this in front of us again, maybe the 8th and 9th when we have that meeting. So we'd have a chance to touch base with our folks at home.
Yep, agree. Director McGinnis.
Well, thank you. First of all, I didn't mean to imply by my comments that somehow we put it on the back burner. I'm just saying this is a missile on our radar that obviously we should monitor at a minimum, engage in the background. This is a critical issue for the district and for the entire state. So I don't oppose that. I'm not sure what staff recommendation is. Monitor a term of art that means that we limit our engagement with the other legislators, or what exactly is the staff recommendation would be the question.
Staff recommendation on this is to amend.
Which I believe has been explained, Director McGinnis, as more actively engaging in discussions, and Zane explained that the concept would be to try and make the bill better as opposed to simply trying to kill it.
Okay, well then I do have a comment on that again, and I think I did cover this. I'm not trying to be repetitive, but once you engage like that, we better make sure we have our votes lined up, because it can quickly turn on us. People who have different views than what we think the constituents of this district have, all of a sudden, we've opened it up. And it's a pretty fine line to walk. I'm not sure we shouldn't just focus on killing the bill. If the bill doesn't have the votes, we're gonna, I think, enhance the possibility it could have votes by encouraging people to amend it. And I think we need to assume not all those amendments are gonna go in our favor. And are we prepared to proceed at this point? Since really, while we've talked about this for a long time, our last meeting, to the best of my knowledge, of course, I'm new to the board, is the first time we really engaged in having some kind of proposal go forward. So I don't feel comfortable at this point saying we ought to start amending and engaging in this particular bill on this subject. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Zane?
Madam President, if the motion on the table were to carry, the board would of course have an opportunity to review any amendments after staff has engaged with both members of the House and Senate Ag Committee.
Yes, and obviously we would be taking this up again at the February 8th and 9th meeting. Okay, we do have a motion on the floor, motion and second, to accept staff recommendation to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, nay.
No,
It's really hard for me to look. I think if you can find in that participant, I'm looking for where it gives you the opportunity to said something about you could also say yes or no. And if
Yes,
nothing else.
it's at the bottom of the participant list, there's the raise hand button, a yes and a no button, and a couple of other things.
And the other thing we could do obviously is a roll call.
Madam Chair, if I might, I don't have a River District computer that I'm using, and I don't have that. It's on here somewhere. Could we just do a
Okay.
roll call?
Yeah, why don't we just do a roll call vote? Stephanie, can you do the roll call, please?
Yes. Martha Whitmore,
Aye.
Kathy Chandler Henry,
Aye.
Mark Rober, Steve Beckley,
Aye.
Unknown caller.
Mike Richard,
Aye.
Kathleen Curry,
Aye.
Stan Winery, Scott McGinnis,
Scott, you're muted. We can't hear you.
I know. I'm having trouble. No,
Tom Gray,
Nay.
Mark Catlin, John Ely,
Nay.
Alden Vandenbrink, Doug
Al,
Munger,
we can't hear Al. Al, I don't know if you are still present, even if you don't have sound, if you could turn your camera on and give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Just want to make sure you have an opportunity to vote.
Or in chat, you could.
Alden,
There.
there's Alden, thumb down, that's a nay, correct, Alden? Right.
Doug Munger,
Aye.
Reby Hazard,
Reby, you're muted.
No?
Taylor Haas.
Aye.
If I can, I didn't hear verbal responses from Commissioner or Director Rober. Mark or Jan, and would you give us?
Yeah, I was having computer problems.
Okay.
My vote's aye.
Aye for you. Thank you very much, Director Rober. And then Director Winery, I also did not hear a verbal aye or nay from you. If you're available and can speak at this point, otherwise we're going to have to put you in as an abstention or non-vote. Director Winery. Okay, no vote from Director Winery. It appears to me that we have 8 ayes and 5 nays. So it appears that the motion passed by a vote of 8 to 5.
The motion has passed. However, I think staff should have the clear picture that this is not an enthusiastic, let's go after it. So I think we will definitely want to have further discussion about this at the February 8th and 9th meeting, an update on who else. I think something else that would be useful is to know what other entities are taking positions and what positions. But clearly we're going to need to have quite a bit more discussion on this. So I think, yes, staff recommendation is to amend. That's what's been approved, but I would temper that a bit until after the February 8th and 9th meeting. Yes, Director Hawes.
You. Just a question on timing. Do we expect this bill to move quickly? Do we have the time to pick it up at the 8th and 9th? I'm just thinking it would be really helpful to either have a list of the things that we want to see changed to make this palatable, or that will give us the clarity that we need to oppose it. And I'm just kind of, or an amendment that we can look at before then. What's the
Thank you, Director Haas. The only intel I have from Senator Quorum is that he would like to begin a series of stakeholder meetings with folks from the Lobby Corps and the water community within the next 2 weeks. That would be the beginning of that process. I've heard from both sponsors that this is not a fast track piece of legislation in their opinion. And I will say, and hopefully it assuages some of the concerns expressed here, that both sponsors have said publicly that if we cannot improve this bill, it will die. And it won't be the first time that a controversial water bill has died under the Golden Dome. So,
Director Curry.
Thank you. And just real quickly, I think Zane and Peter and Andy, I think that's a really creative idea, the approach you're taking with that amendment. And I meant to say that earlier, that substantively, I think it's a neat idea to go that route, because it does take out the debate about interfering in private transactions. And I thought it was kind of a cool idea and a cool approach on an issue that's been so difficult for people. So I wanted to just recommend that hopefully we'll keep going that direction as you think about language.
Thank you, Director Curry. And if I can, Madam President, this brings up an interesting point. Normally at our January quarterly meeting, we set bi-weekly legislative phone calls at lunch. And if we were to do that, this meeting, the first bi-weekly meeting would occur on February. Usually those are on the Thursday, so it would be on the 3rd. And then we would have our special meeting on the 8th. Prior to this discussion, staff was thinking, hey, we can wait till the 8th to have that legislative discussion. We're happy to do that, but we recognize that's the board's decision as to when you set those bi-weekly meetings starting. The special meeting on the 8th throws a little bit of a wrench into that, but if you'll give us direction as a board, we'd appreciate that, and think it's appropriate to discuss.
Thanks, Andy, and that's a really good point. It may be worth it for us to do a short meeting on the 3rd by phone or Zoom, just to get an update on that legislation and anything else that's come up. What is the pleasure of the board? Just kind of, we don't need a motion, but thumbs up or thumbs down. Some of you who don't have cameras turned on, if you could chat or say something. Thumbs up. Okay, I think there's enough interest. Let's plan on a legislative update on on February 3rd. And I don't see that as wasted time, because it's time we would otherwise spend on the 8th. So let's just go ahead and do it on the 3rd. That may give us a little bit more of a jump on the issue, and certainly we'll keep this particular legislation from getting too far down the road before we have another opportunity to consider it. Okay.
I appreciate that. I think that's great. And we will do that. Zane will do his best to get at least a day, if not 2 days before that meeting out, memo on or an email out to the board on the legislation. And if hopefully that will help provide some explanation in detail in terms of what Director Haas is looking for, and I assume others as well. So we'll do that, and appreciate the direction today on these issues. Zane, is that it for the current legislation?
that is. I appreciate the board's time and the conversation and the input and direction. So thank you all very much.
Okay, Andy, the next one is operations.
Yes. Project operations at Wolford. If I can bring in Hunter Causey, our Director of Assets and Chief Engineer for the district. Mr. Causey, you want to take away your request here?
Yeah, thank you, Andy, and thank you, directors. So during December of last year, Authentic Drilling Incorporated completed 5 geotechnical borings at Richard Dam. Part of that drilling program was collecting physical samples of the dam materials. We now need to take those samples to a laboratory. to have the physical properties analyzed. This request is for board authorization for the general manager to enter into a contract with the geotechnical lab for testing of those samples, not to exceed $100,000. I can provide more context at the February meeting, and of course can answer questions now, but I thought I would keep it brief in the interest of time.
Thanks, Hunter. Does anyone have a question for Hunter about this contract? It's lab work that clearly there's no point in gathering the samples and then not doing the lab work.
Right.
Is there a motion to approve the contract?
Moved.
So moved by Director Richard.
Thank you, Director Richard. Is there a second?
Munger second.
Monger second. Thank you very much. Further discussion? Anyone? Questions? Okay, if not, all those in favor, aye.
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 Opposed, nay. All right, motion passes. Hunter, you've got authorization for Andy to sign the contract.
Thank you, directors.
Great, thank you very much. The next item I'm going to cover for Brendan Langenhausen, who's out sick with his family today. If I could, if you recall, the board approved it in previous meeting a lease to the Colorado Water Conservation Board out of Rudai Reservoir from our marketing pool owned by the enterprise for 1,750 acre-feet of water. The CWCB has asked, as they have in the past, that we waive the application fee that we charge applicants for leases, and that application fee is a $400 application fee. While it seems that they could pay that, at the same time, in recognition of the 1,750 acre feet or significant revenue coming into the district, staff is asking that, in fact, the board approve that waiver. Our marketing policy requires the board approve the waiver, so I'm not able to do that without your authority. And that's our request. If there are any questions.
Okay, any questions for Andy on this? If not, is there a motion? Anyone? Yes.
Hawes.
Motion by Director Hawes to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
I'm not sure who had that, but I think
believe
Director
second by
Chandler.
Robert. Yep.
Okay, second by Robert. That's fine. It's been moved and seconded to waive the contract application processing fee for CWCB. They'll be purchasing 1,700 acre feet of water. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Nay. That motion passes. I think that takes us to the end of the agenda. Andy, unless you've got something else, I was just going to remind everyone that the Water Congress is next week, and I think a number of us will be there. The Lower Basin trip, just want to make sure everybody got the memo. It has been postponed until November, hopefully. Yeah.
Yeah,
Andy?
if I could ask, we are trying to schedule that in November now to get it on people's calendars. For staff, the first week in November works if you went Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, which is similar to what we had planned in February. That does put us on the election eve on the Tuesday of, I believe it's November the 8th. Most people would end up having to travel, and I'm sensitive that a number of folks are involved in elections and may desire to be here. The alternative that we've come up with would be the following week, which we would prefer to put that in on a 14th, 15th, 16th, which would mean that people would arrive in Vegas on the evening of the 13th, which is a Sunday. But just wanted to see if there are objections to having to travel on election day eve, recognizing again that some directors who want to come on the tour may have some obligations there. So we welcome direction on that. Just wanted to try to get as many directors as possible on that tour. The later part of the week tends to work better for our county commissioner representatives because it avoids the regularly scheduled county commission meetings, and that's why we had pushed it to the end of the week, just to balance out the other issues. So if there are opinions, we'd love to hear them. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and schedule it for that 9th, 10th, 11th, I think.
It works for me. Either one of them work for me. Anyone else feel strongly one way or the other, or want to weigh in on this?
I know I can't do that week of the 14th.
So so the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th would work better for you. Okay.
Yeah, earlier is better. Even
That works
earlier would be
better for
better.
me as well. I'm not running this year, so I can watch the election results.
I wouldn't be available in the 15th. I would be out of town for a convention. So the first week's better for me.
It sounds as though election night isn't going to present as big of a problem as going into the following week.
Great.
So I think you can just go ahead and assume you can plan the 9th, 10th, and 11th with travel on the 8th.
Excellent. And if the directors can just make sure that we don't have another strain of the COVID coronavirus that's hitting the lower basin at that time, at least, so that they'll be willing to take us as their guests, that would be appreciated. So,
yeah, indeed. Our crystal balls are hazy.
Yeah, I think when we were talking to them, just so you know, there were references to our tour bus being comparable to a cruise ship and not being willing to accept our docking. So let's just try to avoid that if we can in November. So.
Indeed. Okay, and otherwise, yes, Director Hawes.
Thank you. Just a logistics question based on that conversation we had about the legislature. Should we be planning for every other week calls on Thursdays? Can we block those out? And could you all just send us, like, are they starting on the 3rd and is it every other week?
We're going to start on the 3rd and we're going to do it every other week, which means you'll actually have 3 weeks in February where you have meetings every week. We will keep the legislative calls short. Our unless directed differently by the board, our practice is to have those at lunch. So at noon. We do find it better to do it on Zoom for a lot of reasons in terms of being able to control access and recording and all of that. So we would prefer to have it on Zoom, and we would plan on having it every other Thursday at noon. I'll have Stephanie hopefully can send out an invite to everybody for each of those meetings. It'll come out as one invite, but a recurring invite on the every other Thursday through the legislative session. Keep in mind that we may cancel those. We may not need all those, but we'll get them all on the books and then let you know if direction is needed, if that works for the board.
Okay.
And I would, excuse me, Madam Chair, but just to tag on to what Andy said, occasionally we do find the need to add non-legislative issues to those calls, and we ask for the board's indulgence in that. Still try to keep things under the hour. But as board members that have been on the board for longer than a year know, we will ask for your indulgence on that from time to time.
Okay. Anything else that anyone wants to bring up or anything for the good of the order? Okay. I'm not seeing anyone raising their hand or jumping in. So this meeting's adjourned. See you on the 3rd. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Greatly appreciate everybody.